Okay, here we have a question that gives us the following assets and liabilities. We've got beginning of the year, end of the year, and here's our assets and liabilities presented over here. They tell us that common stock in the amount of 23.5 was issued during the year and that dividends of 6,700 were paid during the year. They want to know what the amount of net income is. When we first look at this, at first glance, it doesn't appear apparent where net income is. That's not a component that was given to us. We don't have revenues and expenses to calculate net income. But when you're confronted with a situation like this, my recommendation is to start to write down what it is that you know. We do know one equation that I think we can work with. We've got assets here and we've got liabilities here. And we know that assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity. So let's start out and solve for an unknown, which is stockholders' equity, and see if we can go from there. So the first thing that we'll do is solve for beginning of the year. Beginning of the year had 231 in assets equal to 96.5 for liabilities plus X. And the end of the year, we're going to solve for X here in a minute, but the end of the year had 262 in assets equal to 78.4 in liabilities plus X. And we'll go ahead and solve. And we calculate the stockholders' equity at the beginning of the year. So this is stockholders' equity at the beginning of the year was 134,500, and stockholders' equity at the end of the year was 183,600. Okay, well, that's all good and well, but we still don't have the requirement of the problem, which is net income. And so what we then have to ask ourselves is, now that we have stockholders' equity, does that get us any closer to solving for the missing variable that we're trying to reach? If we were to break this out, our accounting equation, assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity, because now we have all three components. If we start to break out stockholders' equity, one thing that we do notice is that it can be broken down into retained earnings and common stock, and that retained earnings can be broken down into net income and dividends. And now we can see that there is actually the variable that we're missing, net income, present in this equation somewhere. We just have to figure out how to get there, right? One thing that we'll notice is by calculating the beginning of the year and the end of the year, we do have in between here a change in stockholders' equity. The change in stockholders' equity is 183,600 minus 134,500. In other words, that gives us 49,100. So from beginning of the year to the end of the year, stockholders' equity has changed by 49,100. That change was made up of the change in these two accounts. Well, what do they tell us about these two accounts? They tell us that common stock has increased or was issued during the year 23,500. They also tell us that dividends were paid of 6,700. We know the only other change that then exists in retained earnings, which is one component of the change in stockholders' equity, is net income. Therefore, we could say something like this. The change in stockholders' equity is equal to the change in retained earnings plus the change in common stock. We could also then say that the change in retained earnings is equal to net incomes minus dividends. So the change in stockholders' equity is equal to net income minus dividends plus the change in common stock. Now we plug in to see if we have one variable, and if we do, we can go ahead and solve. Our change in stockholders' equity was 49,100. Net income, we don't know. That's a variable we're trying to calculate, so we'll leave that as X. Minus the dividends, which are 6,700. That's given to us right here. And then plus the change in common stock, which is told to us right here of 23,500. Okay, we're going to go ahead and solve this equation, and we should, because our goal right here is to get net income, we should, if we solve for X, be able to calculate then net income. Okay, after working through the equation, X or net income equals 32,300. We now just have to find the answer in the multiple choice question that agrees to that, and that would be C here.